The second volume of Joshua Williamson's ongoing Superman series, The Chained, expands the universe by building up the mythology of Metropolis and putting one of its most infamous citizens in the forefront. Let me know down in the comments what you guys thought of this storyline. I'm Brennan for the New Wave Nerds. Subscribe down below for more nerd content and commentary. Now let's roll the intro. In Superman the Chained, the Man of Steel is challenged like never before when the menace called the Chained is freed from deep beneath Supercorp. Why did Lex Luthor imprison this mysterious foe there in the first place? And will even superpowered armor be enough to give an outmatched Superman the upper hand? Plus new threats from a transformed Brainiac, the Lex Luthor Revenge Squad, and Luthor's mother and daughter? Oh, the trade collects Superman numbers 6 through 7 and is written by Joshua Williamson and penciled by Dan Jurgens, Bruno Redondo, Gleb Melnikov, and Edwin Galmon. Now, as always, we're going to begin with a brief non-spoiler review. This series, again, I'm a big fan of Joshua Williamson's writing here, so it's no surprise that I think that this series does a very good job of continuing to expand the universe of Superman, continuing to expand Metropolis, adding more to its history, and expanding on some of the most integral characters to the Man of Steel himself. I think what we do with Lex Luthor here is really interesting. Of course, I'm biased. As I've said before, he is one of my favorite supervillains of all time. He's great, and the way that we take a look at him in this series is really fascinating. This trade paperback really sort of solidifies that in the beginning portion of this ongoing Superman series, Lex Luthor is kind of the main character. Obviously, it's a Superman title, his name is on the book, he's in every issue, it's always about Superman fighting some problem, but these 6 issues here, they really hit home the fact that this is a story about Lex Luthor's journey. And again, knowing where that's going to go further on in the series is really, really fascinating and interesting to me. I think it does a really, really good job. I love Joshua Williamson's stuff. I will say, however, that I feel this especially after rereading the first trade paperback, which collects the first 5 issues and an annual, I believe, and this with the next 7, I think that this should have been collected in one major story arc. I feel like there is no real line of delineation between the two. I feel like you could have collected these first 12 issues in one collection and just called it Superman Volume 1 Supercorp. This volume, this story arc, I feel is so indelibly tied to the first. You will not be able to really understand anything that's going on unless you read the first 6 issues. All of that means that even though the story, I think, is good and we see some interesting places and some interesting cast members, I think this all should have been collected as one story. I really, really do. This definitely does not really stand on its own in the way that some of the future storylines do. But to get into the rest of this storyline, we'll have to talk spoilers. But before we do that, I'm going to politely ask you all to head on over to patreon.com/newwavenerds. If you like the work that we do here and want to help us make these videos look and sound even better, then that is the place to go. We've got lots of different benefit tiers, so you get a little something out of supporting us. And once we hit either 15 new patrons or $50 a month, we're going to be releasing a very special 12-part video docu-series where Shade and I go over the classic comic series, DC's Crisis on Infinite Earths. So again, if you like what we do here and want to help us make this even better, then head on over to patreon.com/newwavenerds. Now let's get into the spoiler section. Let's talk about the meat and potatoes of this comic here. Like I said, I really enjoy what's going on. There are some more wacky aspects to it. This series, and I would say by and large, Superman throughout the past couple years, really feels to me like sort of a modernization of the Silver Age. It is very sort of wacky stories, putting Superman in a weird position. we're moving away from some of the more grounded Superman stories that we've seen in times like the early thousands, say. Now, that's not to say that every story released during that time is grounded, but you understand the point here. I mean, there is a part in this storyline where Superman is sent back to the Wild West. All right. That's, I mean, it's a very weird story here. But I definitely think this volume is better read with the other one. And so that's why I'm confused as to why it's collected in like a separate, why it's collected in two different trades. I wonder if, once we get a little bit more time on this, if we're going to do like a Superman by Joshua Williamson omnibus, which is going to collect these first 12 issues, as well as the House of Brainiac event. I mean, that would make sense to me. That is more or less a closed loop on this story of Lex Luthor. But especially like the villains here seen in this, in these 7 issues from number 6 to number 12. Again, they are introduced in the first volume. They are the Dr. Farm and Mr. Graft that I talked about in our last comic book review. Here is where they really get introduced and really get fleshed out. We see much more of their backstory here, much more of their relationship with Lex Luthor. And as alluded to in the synopsis, they put together the Lex Luthor Revenge Squad, complete with people whom Lex has screwed over and would like to, murderize him, if you will. I think that all of these villains are kind of undeveloped. I think that they are all kind of really, they have lots of potential, I will say. Like the main villain, the titular villain here, the Chained, I think is a really cool idea. I think it expands, again, on the universe in a really, really interesting way. We get a tie to Connor Kent's Superboy, to Con-El, because they were both, or rather, Lex Luthor created the Chained. He is the one who gave him superpowers, and then that information, that research, got in the hands of Cadmus, who then used it to create Superboy. I think that is interesting. It sort of adds a little bit more to Superboy's mythos, to his own backstory, a little bit to his creation. And I would really like to see more of the Chained, and I would like to see him become a member of like Superboy's Rogues Gallery. Because again, Superboy is one of those characters who I think does have potential, but has never really hit it for me. He's never really had, at least in my opinion, he has 2 great moments in his history, and that is his time in the Reign of Superman, where he was introduced, and then in Infinite Crisis. What happens in that story, I'm not going to say, because we may or may not be doing that on a future episode in some capacity. But those are the only really great stories, and I feel like part of that is because my perception is that Superboy doesn't really have any of his own villains, and I think to tie him to this Chained character would be really, really cool because they have a sort of common history. They are both the products of experimentation. They have the same power. They both have tactile telekinesis, which means they can manipulate things that they touch. Now, the Chained, who is Sammy Stryker, is much more accomplished and much more powerful. And so I think that there's the potential there for a really, really good story arc between him and Superboy. I think it would be really fun. Plus, the design of the Chained is really cool, in my opinion. I would really like to see some other artists take on it, but I think the Chained really does have potential to be an interesting villain moving forward. And based off the way that this story ends, I am sure that we're going to see him again. The question is just where and when. But I think there's definitely potential there. As I talked about with Dr. Farm and Mr. Graft in my review for the Supercorp storyline, the first volume of this Superman series, I think they're more or less okay. I like the idea that we have these villains that Superman has to deal with, because they had, interactions with Lex in the early years and they hate him. But I still don't necessarily like the fact that Luthor was trying to be a costumed superhero. Like I mentioned in that review, I like the idea that Lex was always about trying to help people in his own, egomaniacal way, for sure. Never really pursuing those ends in the greatest way possible, but he was trying. I think that is interesting, but I don't need him running around as a superhero. But the way that the relationship between Lex and Farman Graft sort of evolves throughout this second issue is really, really interesting. We see in the first issue, or rather in the first trade paperback in Supercorp, we see that they had interactions where in the beginning they were enemies. In this second trade paperback, we learn that they were enemies until Lex Luthor found out that they were using kryptonite and experimenting and doing research on kryptonite. And so he joined up with them. They learned together about the properties of kryptonite, about how it could be altered, about how it could be used to affect people in mostly negative ways. And then once the research had hit a certain point, Lex Luthor dumped them. He stole their research and discarded them off to the wind. I think that is interesting. I don't like the fact that Lex is running around as a costume superhero, but if you're going to do it, and if you're going to have this be the story, I like the fact that Lex was fighting them, and then he saw that they had kryptonite and decided, this is an opportunity here. And so he began working with the villains. I think that's really cool. It does quite a bit to build up Lex Luthor's character, and I think it's really, really fun. Now, the last member, or it's not technically the last member, because for an issue there's another one, but I'm not going to necessarily get into that at this point. The last member of the Lex Luthor Revenge Squad is Lex's mother, Letitia Luthor, which I think is interesting. Of course, we've known for a long time that Lex has always had a, let's say, a strained relationship with the various members of his family. Now, I know that Letitia had been introduced before this, but I had never read anything with her. So my perception of Lex Luthor's family comes from things like Smallville, or from various Superman origin stories, like I believe Birthright, where the only one we really know is Lionel Luthor. And so for me, to see his mom come in and have this very confrontational interaction, I think is really, really cool. But my favorite part about the introduction of Letitia Luthor, or I should say reintroduction of Letitia Luthor here, isn't actually Letitia herself. It is the person that Letitia brings with her when she comes to Metropolis. And that is, again, as the synopsis alluded to, Lex Luthor's daughter, Lena Luthor. Now, I really like Lena Luthor. I think she is such an interesting character. I hope that we don't forget that she exists. I hope that she stays around. But she's really, really cool to me. And there is an issue in this where it is sort of viewing things through Lena's perspective, and she asks a hologram of Lex, like a holographic representation of the database, who is Lena Luthor, and the hologram gives the origin of Lena. And it's this very analytical, sort of sterile telling, and Lena Luthor at the end goes, I was expecting there to be more in his own daughter's file, or something like that. And it's really, really cool. But I enjoy just her origin in and of itself, where she is, created, she is born, and then Lex Luthor gives her to Brainiac so that he can unlock knowledge. And then she becomes the avatar of Brainiac. And then, she gets saved and la-di-da. And then Lex Luthor cures the Brainiac, the influence of Brainiac from her mind, and sends her off on a private island so that, nobody can find her or whatever. I think it's really cool. She comes in and she is like the perfect embodiment of like the moody teenager. There's even a line where Letitia is like, she's pulling her moody teenager act waiting out in the hall. But I think Lena is really, really interesting. And she's introduced in like issues 6 or 7 or something like this, very, very early on. And at the time of this recording, in the current issue of Superman is like number 25 or 26. I just talked about this last recording and I forgot to look it up. So it's 20 something. I want to say it's 26. But in any case, even in that short amount of time, I feel like we've actually really seen Lena Luthor like mature and become an even more interesting character. Like, and I'm not going to talk about this too much because I already did a review on it. Go check that out. But in the Lex Luthor special, I feel like she is so mature in that, just in these 20 issues. Lena is such a cool character, and she's going to play a large part in next week's review for House of Brainiac, so stick around for that. But Luthor is one of my favorite villains. This story really puts him at the forefront. Again, this whole arc, from issue 1 to now, has all been about Lex Luthor like trying to prove that he is a good guy, and having to see Lex struggle with that and eventually like try to overcome it is really, really interesting to me. Again, some of this is going to get affected by things that we will see and probably talk about in the future. So I'm not going to talk about them right here. But as far as this, specifically these 2 first volumes go, I really enjoy the characterization of Lex here. I think it's really, really fascinating. He's got this great interaction with Lois somewhere in here where, and again, take this how you will, whether you believe Lex is necessarily telling the truth or not. But there's a great line. Let me see if I can pull it up here. So he's talking about Superman. Lois is like questioning him, and he says, "There's a question I've often asked myself. When you look into the abyss looks back. But what if the abyss looked back and saw Superman? Could he change the abyss the way that he has changed me?" I think that's such a good line. And to me, it doesn't even, it's just very well written. And it sort of hits at the whole point of like what Superman is, especially in some of the more modern continuity with the All-In special, is that Superman is like the living embodiment of hope inside the DC universe. And so I really, really like that line. I really like that it is playing that up. And again, some of this is going to be affected by like what happens to Lex Luthor in future issues. But I like to believe that he believes what he's saying here, at least partially. Maybe he's got machinations going on in the background. Maybe he's still working against Superman. But I like to believe that at some level, Lex Luthor agrees with what he is saying. I think it's really interesting, and the way that he is characterized throughout this whole story arc, I think, is so fun. Now, I got a couple more points that I want to say, and then we're going to close this thing out. I mentioned at the beginning that there is a moment in here when Superman is sent back in time to the Wild West. Now, I don't really like that. I'm not a huge fan of that. It's weird. It doesn't necessarily really make sense to me. How is he sent back? Like, how does this actually happen? Because it's in an interaction between Superman, Marilyn Moonlight, who was introduced in the first volume, and Dr. Farm. Dr. Farm hits Marilyn Moonlight with some kryptonite, and somehow that sends her back into the Wild West. I don't know. It's very weird. It's very convoluted. To me, it seemed like the type of thing where they were like, okay, we need to figure out a way for Superman to reverse this kryptonite bomb that's going to explode over Metropolis in issue 11 or whatever. Okay, well, we'll have him go back in time and take a look at the plans, although we're not going to show it at the time. We're just going to talk about it later on. And then that's going to be the way that he saves the day. It was a little bit weird, I must admit. But I do think, even though in some places it's a little clunky, this series, Joshua Williamson does do a pretty decent job of like tying things back in that have happened multiple issues back, or even in the very beginning. In the very first issue of this series, there is a scene where Dr. Farm and Mr. Graft are operating on Bizarro. And it's just dropped there and then never mentioned until here, until like issue 10, 11, or 12 or something like this. And that's when it's revealed why Dr. Farm and Mr. Graft were dissecting Bizarro, because they were needed to have something close to Superman's physiology to figure out what the effects of the kryptonite would be. I think that's pretty cool. I think it's pretty well written. But like I said, there are a few things in here where I'm like, why are we doing this? I feel like there's a much more... either if you're going to do this, then go all in and maybe, tie things together even further. Lay some seeds early on that are going to be bloomed in the end, or just don't do it at all. I feel like in some cases, like with the Wild West thing, it feels like half-baked. Like they kind of had part of an idea, but weren't necessarily quite sure how to work it in. And so they were just, working it out as they went along. But I don't know. I mean, maybe you enjoy it. I think it looks really good. I think the design for what Superman is wearing while he's in the Wild West is great. It's weird. It makes me question, like, are they... So they I would have to imagine that they are in the exact same place that Metropolis is, just, like 200 years ago or whatever. Or however long it would be. I don't know what year that it's supposed to be in the DC universe. So why does it look like it's in Arizona? Because, I mean, pretty sure Metropolis isn't in Arizona, so that's an open question. But I don't know. I'm not so sure. In any case, it is, even though I don't necessarily like the way that it works out narratively, I do think that it is a really, really fun, well, I said it earlier, a fun Silver Age adventure. Superman gets sent back into the Wild West, and he's got to figure out a way to get back. I mean, it's a fun little Silver Age side story. I think it's pretty interesting. Now, the final thing that I want to mention, and this applies to this volume as well as the first one, I like the way that throughout these first 12 issues, Joshua Williamson has been planting seeds, sometimes overtly, so maybe seeds isn't necessarily the quite the right word, but we see Brainiac and we see what he is doing, and it all leads up to the very next review, the very next event, starting in like Action Comics, I don't know anymore, 1065 maybe or something like this. But it starts in, as far as the Superman series, it's Superman 13. But it is the House of Brainiac event. I was trying to load it up to figure out what the Action Comics issue was, but my DC Universe Infinite crashed. So I'm sort of stumbling here as I try and find what I'm looking for. It's Action Comics 1064, and then part 2 is Superman number 13. So we're going to be talking about those next week, and I really like the way that Brainiac is sort of sprinkled throughout these first 12 issues. I would have liked... I mean, there are some places where it's like we kind of see Brainiac for like, 3 or 4 pages. Like we get a good chunk of story and building up and stuff like that. And all that's in one issue. I do wish that it sort of had been sprinkled out throughout the entire run a little bit more. Like maybe we get a panel or two here in issue number 1, and then a couple panels here in issue 5, and then so on and so forth. And maybe the closer you get to the event, you see more and more of Brainiac to sort of, again, lead up to it. But I do like that we get Brainiac a little bit throughout this. It's sort of, obviously I've read the next story, so I know what's coming. And this is in the past, so I guess it's, pretty easy to know for sure. But at the time, if I had been reading this as it were released on a month-to-month basis, I think it does a good job of building up the suspense of like, okay, where are we going to see Brainiac and what is he going to do? How is he going to be different this time? And I think it's pretty well done, and I think it's really interesting. So by and large, I think the Superman Volume 2, The Chained, is a pretty fun comic. I think overall, I like the first volume better. But like I said, it is hard not to tie the two together because they are so inextricably linked. I think that they really, really should have been collected as just one volume. Now, I understand that volume would be like 13 issues, and so it would be kind of large and a little bit pricey, and so maybe they're just trying to release it this way, because you can do 5 issues here, 7 issues there, and price it at like $15 instead of, doing 35 or whatever. I don't know. I haven't looked at the prices of a trade paperback in a long time. I haven't bought any in a while. So I see why you would do that from like a marketing perspective, but from a narrative perspective, I think these two are much better when they are put together. And like I said, I hope that they do like a Joshua Williamson omnibus where it collects the first 2 volumes and House of Brainiac, which is what we're going to be talking about next Thursday. So again, make sure that you comment down below. Let me know what you think about this. Like and subscribe. Hit the notifications bell so that you never miss another episode. Like I said, next Thursday, we're going to be looking at House of Brainiac. And the Tuesday after this, we are going, Shade will be back, I suppose, is the proper way to say this. He will be back, and he and I are going to be reviewing Jurassic World to get ready for the new Jurassic World Rebirth. Taking a slight break from the summer of Superman as far as movies go. We're keeping it going with comics until the movie comes out. But yep, so stay around, stay tuned. I said stick tuned a long time ago accidentally, and now every time I try to say anything with stick or like stick around or stay tuned, I mix them up in my head. I jumble myself up further. But in any case, do any of those 3. Stick around, stay tuned, or stick tuned to the New Wave Nerds channel for more Superman stuff. And I will see you guys on Tuesday to talk about Jurassic World.